My name is Emma, and this is the story of how my best friend and my fiancé betrayed me in the worst possible way, and how I made sure their betrayal was exposed to everyone who mattered. Let me start from the beginning, because understanding how deep this betrayal went is crucial to understanding why I did what I did. I met my fiancé Jake 3 years ago at a marketing conference in Denver. We literally bumped into each other at the coffee station, and I accidentally spilled my latte all over his presentation notes. Instead of being annoyed, Jake just laughed and said maybe the universe was telling him his pitch needed work anyway. We ended up spending the rest of the conference together, talking about everything from business strategies to our shared love of hiking and reality TV shows. Jake was everything I had been looking for: ambitious but not arrogant, funny but not immature, and he made me feel like the most interesting person in any room. When Jake moved to Portland 8 months later to be closer to me, I knew he was serious about our relationship. He integrated himself into my friend group, won over my protective parents, and everything felt perfect. My best friend Sophia had been in my life since college. We were randomly assigned as roommates freshman year, and despite being complete opposites, we became inseparable. She was the sister I never had, the person I called when anything significant happened in my life. When I introduced Sophia to Jake, I was thrilled that they got along so well. Sophia had always been protective of me when it came to dating, so her immediate approval felt like the final piece falling into place. Looking back now, I realize their easy banter should have been a red flag, but at the time, I was just happy that the two most important people in my life enjoyed each other's company. When Jake proposed to me on a hiking trip to Crater Lake last fall, Sophia was the first person I called. I was practically screaming with excitement as I told her about how he had hidden the ring in my backpack and proposed at sunrise overlooking the lake. Sophia squealed and cried happy tears right along with me, and when I asked her to be my maid of honor, she said it would be the greatest privilege of her life. The wedding planning process was everything I had dreamed it would be. Sophia helped with every detail, from venues to dress shopping to coordinating vendors. Jake seemed equally invested, taking charge of the groomsmen and being surprisingly opinionated about decorations. We spent evenings planning our future together. Everything was falling into place beautifully. We booked a gorgeous venue overlooking the Columbia River, hired an amazing photographer, and planned for about 150 guests. It was going to be exactly the celebration we had envisioned. But then strange things started happening about 6 weeks before the wedding. It began with small changes in their behavior that I initially dismissed as pre-wedding stress. Sophia started being less available for wedding planning, often canceling our meetings with vague excuses about work emergencies. When we did spend time together, she seemed distracted, constantly checking her phone. Jake became increasingly busy with work projects that required him to stay late at the office or travel unexpectedly. He would come home exhausted, claiming he was trying to wrap everything up before our honeymoon. I tried to be understanding. Wedding planning is stressful, and I knew they were both dealing with their own work pressures. But there were other things that nagged at me, small inconsistencies that I pushed aside because I trusted them both completely. There were times when I would call Sophia and hear Jake's voice in the background, even though they claimed to be in different places. When I asked about it, Sophia would make excuses about coffee shops or TV shows. Jake started receiving text messages at odd hours that would make him smile secretively. When I asked who was texting, he would say it was his business partner, but he would always put his phone face down immediately. Sophia began asking strange questions about my relationship, whether we had talked about postponing the wedding, whether I worried we were rushing into marriage. At the time, I thought she was just being a concerned friend. The most unsettling incident happened about 3 weeks before the wedding. I planned to surprise Jake with dinner at his favorite restaurant after what I thought was a stressful day at work. When I arrived at his office building, the parking garage was nearly empty, and the security guard told me most people had left hours earlier. I called Jake, and he answered sounding slightly out of breath. He told me he was in an important video conference with investors and could not talk. I could hear music and voices in the background, but when I mentioned it, he said his business partner had the TV on. Something felt off, but Jake called me back 2 hours later with apologies and explanations about the meeting running long. By the time he arrived with Thai food and apology flowers, I had convinced myself I was being paranoid. The week of the wedding was a whirlwind of final preparations, family arriving from out of town, and the usual last-minute crises that seem to happen no matter how carefully you plan. Sophia was staying at my apartment to help with getting ready and making sure everything went smoothly on the big day. Jake was staying at his groomsman's house for the traditional bachelor separation before the wedding. The night before the wedding, we had our rehearsal dinner at a private dining room in one of Portland's best restaurants. Both our families were there, along with the wedding party and a few close friends who had traveled from far away. It should have been a perfect evening of celebration and anticipation. But I noticed that Sophia and Jake seemed to be avoiding each other throughout the dinner. They did not sit near each other, barely made eye contact during the toasts, and when they did interact, it felt strained and artificial. I assumed they were both just nervous about their roles in the ceremony and did not want to add any drama to an already emotional evening. After dinner, while I was saying goodbye to family members and confirming last-minute details with our wedding coordinator, I noticed Sophia and Jake having what looked like an intense conversation near the restaurant's back exit. They were standing close together, speaking in hushed tones, and Sophia looked upset about something. When I approached them to see what was wrong, they quickly separated and both claimed they had been discussing logistics for the next day. That night, back at my apartment, Sophia seemed distracted and kept checking her phone. When I asked if everything was okay, she said she was just nervous about her maid of honor speech and wanted to make sure she had captured everything she wanted to say about our friendship and my relationship with Jake. She hugged me tightly before we went to bed and told me how much she loved me and how happy she was that I had found someone who made me so happy. Looking back, I realized that was probably the last genuine moment between us. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear, exactly what we had hoped for our outdoor ceremony. I woke up feeling excited and nervous and completely in love with the man I was about to marry. Sophia was already up, making coffee, and laying out all our getting-ready supplies with military precision. The early morning hours flew by in a blur of hair and makeup, champagne and laughter, and the controlled chaos of getting a bridal party ready for photos. My mom, my sister, and my 2 other bridesmaids were all in high spirits, sharing stories and making toasts to friendship and new beginnings. But I started to notice that Sophia was acting strangely again. She kept stepping away to take phone calls, claiming they were vendor check-ins or coordination calls with the groomsmen. She seemed distracted during what should have been our final bonding moments as single and married friends. Most unsettling, she kept making comments about how I looked beautiful and how Jake was so lucky, but there was something hollow about the way she said it, like she was reading from a script. About an hour before we were supposed to leave for photos, Sophia's phone rang again. She answered it with an urgent whisper and stepped into the bathroom for privacy. I could hear her through the door, and while I could not make out specific words, her tone sounded upset and almost argumentative. When she came out, her eyes were red, and she looked like she had been crying. When I asked what was wrong, she said one of her family members was having a medical emergency, and she might need to leave immediately after the ceremony. I was disappointed that she might miss the reception, but I told her family had to come first, and we would understand whatever she needed to do. That was a lie, but I would not discover the truth until later. We arrived at the venue, and everything looked absolutely magical. The florist had outdone herself with cascading arrangements of white peonies and greenery. The string quartet was playing beautifully, and our guests were mingling happily in the cocktail area while we finished photos. The photographer wanted to get some shots of Jake and me before the ceremony, so we met at a designated spot behind the main building where guests could not see us. When I saw Jake in his navy blue suit, looking handsome and nervous and perfect, my heart practically stopped. This was really happening. I was about to marry my best friend, my partner, my future. But when I looked at Jake's face, something seemed off. He looked pale and anxious in a way that went beyond normal wedding day nerves. When I asked if he was okay, he said he was just overwhelmed by how beautiful I looked and how surreal it felt that we were actually getting married. He hugged me tightly and told me he loved me, but there was something in his voice that I could not quite identify. During our photo session, I noticed Jake checking his phone several times, which was unusual since he normally never looked at work messages during our personal time together. When the photographer asked him to put the phone away for pictures, he seemed annoyed and distracted. I asked if there was a work emergency, and he said his business partner was just nervous about a client presentation and needed reassurance. Finally, it was time for the ceremony. I took my place at the back of the aisle with my father, watching as the wedding party processed to the altar. My bridesmaids looked beautiful in their sage green dresses, walking in perfect timing to the string quartet's arrangement of our favorite song. Then it was Sophia's turn. As my maid of honor, she would walk down the aisle just before me, taking her place at the altar to witness Jake and me exchange vows. She looked stunning in her dress, carrying her bouquet of white roses, smiling at our guests as she made her way toward the front. But when Sophia reached the altar and took her place across from the groomsmen, I saw something that made my blood run cold. She looked directly at Jake, and he looked back at her, and for just a moment, they shared a look that was intimate, knowing, and completely inappropriate for the circumstances. It was not the look of a friend supporting another friend's wedding. It was the look of two people who shared a secret, two people who had been intimate with each other. In that moment, everything I had been trying to dismiss and rationalize over the past few weeks suddenly made horrifying sense. My father squeezed my arm and asked if I was ready, and somehow I managed to nod and begin walking down the aisle. But my mind was racing, trying to process what I had just seen while also trying to get through what was supposed to be the most important ceremony of my life. As I walked toward Jake, smiling for our guests and trying to look like the blissful bride everyone expected to see, I felt like I was having an out-of-body experience. Part of me was going through the motions of a beautiful wedding, while another part of me was frantically trying to understand whether what I thought I had seen was real. When I reached the altar, Jake took my hands and looked into my eyes, and I searched his face for any sign of the man I thought I knew. He smiled and mouthed that I looked beautiful, but there was something guilty in his expression, something that confirmed my worst fears. The officiant began the ceremony, and I tried to focus on his words about love and commitment and partnership. But I kept glancing at Sophia, who was standing just a few feet away from me, holding my bouquet and supposedly supporting me on the most important day of my life. And that's when I saw it again. Sophia caught Jake's eye and gave him a small, private smile. It was subtle enough that probably no one else noticed, but I was watching for it now, and it was unmistakable. There was intimacy there, familiarity, shared knowledge that had nothing to do with their roles in my wedding. The officiant was asking Jake to repeat his vows, and Jake was promising to love, honor, and cherish me for the rest of his life. But as he spoke the words, I noticed Sophia's expression. She was not looking at me with happiness and support. She was looking at Jake with something that looked like sadness, maybe even regret. And then, in a moment that will be burned into my memory forever, Sophia caught me watching her. For just a second, our eyes met, and I saw her realize that I had figured it out. Instead of looking ashamed or apologetic, Instead of looking like someone who had been caught in a terrible betrayal, Sophia's expression shifted into something that looked almost like amusement. She was smirking. My best friend, my maid of honor, was smirking at me during my wedding ceremony because she had been sleeping with my fiancé and thought it was funny that I had just figured it out. I felt like the ground was disappearing beneath my feet. Here I was, standing at the altar in front of 150 people who had come to celebrate my marriage, and I was realizing that the two people I trusted most in the world had been betraying me for weeks, maybe months. The officiant turned to me and asked if I would take Jake to be my husband, to love and honor him in sickness and health, for better and worse, for the rest of my life. Everyone was looking at me expectantly, waiting for me to say the two words that would legally bind me to a man who had been cheating on me with my best friend. In that moment, I had a choice. I could go through with the ceremony, pretend I had not seen what I had seen, and deal with the betrayal privately later. I could save face in front of all our family and friends, avoid the humiliation of calling off a wedding at the altar, and handle this devastating revelation in private. Or I could make sure that Jake and Sophia faced the consequences of their actions in front of everyone who mattered to all of us. I chose the second option, but I knew I needed proof. Standing there at the altar, I realized that I could not just accuse them of having an affair based on meaningful looks and suspicious behavior. I needed evidence that would make their betrayal undeniable. So I did something that probably seems crazy in retrospect. I told the officiant that I needed a moment to compose myself, that I was feeling overwhelmed with emotion and needed to step aside briefly before we continued. Our families and guests probably thought I was having a typical bride moment, overcome with the magnitude of getting married. I walked over to Sophia and, in a voice that only she could hear, I told her that I knew about her and Jake. I told her that I had figured out they were having an affair, and that if she had any respect for our friendship, she would tell me the truth right now. Sophia's smirk disappeared, and for a moment, she looked genuinely panicked. But then her expression hardened, and she leaned close to me and said something that still makes my blood boil when I think about it. She said Jake had come to her weeks ago, confused about his feelings and unsure whether he was ready for marriage. She said she had just been helping him work through his doubts, and that if I was really his best choice, I should not be worried about their friendship. She said I was being paranoid and dramatic, and that if I really loved Jake, I would trust him. But then she said something that revealed the truth behind her manipulation. She said that Jake had told her he was not sure he was in love with me anymore, that he thought maybe we had gotten engaged because it seemed like the next logical step rather than because he could not imagine his life without me. She said this with a tone of fake sympathy, like she was delivering difficult but necessary truth. But her eyes were cold, and I could see that she was enjoying this moment of having power over me. That's when I knew I needed to get proof, and I knew exactly how to do it. I told Sophia I needed to use the restroom before we continued with the ceremony, and I asked her to come with me to help me with my dress. Once we were alone in the bridal suite, I did something that felt completely insane, but also completely necessary. I told Sophia that I believed her about Jake having doubts, and that if he was not sure about marrying me, I needed to know before we went through with the ceremony. I said I wanted her to text him and ask him to meet us in the bridal suite so we could all talk honestly about what was really going on. Sophia looked surprised but also relieved, like she thought I was finally going to make things easy for her. She sent Jake a text asking him to come to the bridal suite for an urgent conversation, and within minutes, he was knocking on the door. What Jake and Sophia did not know was that I had set my phone to record video and had placed it strategically on the vanity table where it could capture the entire room. I pretended to be fixing my makeup while they talked, but I was actually documenting their conversation. When Jake arrived, Sophia immediately started talking about how I had figured out something was going on between them and how they needed to decide what they were going to tell me. Jake looked panicked and started saying they needed to stick to their story about him just having pre-wedding doubts. But then Sophia said something that made everything clear. She said she was tired of sneaking around, tired of pretending to be my supportive best friend while she was in love with my fiancé. She said she thought Jake should just tell me the truth about their relationship and call off the wedding. Jake's response was even worse. He said he had not intended for things to go so far, but that being with Sophia had made him realize he had never felt truly passionate about me. He said he cared about me and did not want to hurt me, but that he could not go through with marrying me when he was in love with someone else. Sophia asked what they were going to do, and Jake said he thought they should wait until after the honeymoon to tell me about their relationship. He said it would be easier for everyone if we went through with the wedding, and then dealt with the divorce quietly later. I could not believe what I was hearing. They were planning to let me marry Jake, go on my honeymoon believing I had married the love of my life, and then destroy my marriage after I had already legally and emotionally committed to this man in front of everyone I cared about. But the most devastating part was still coming. Sophia laughed and said she could not believe I had not figured out their affair sooner. She said they had been hooking up for almost 3 months, usually at Jake's office after hours or at her apartment when they knew I would be busy with work or wedding planning. She said it had been almost too easy to deceive me because I trusted them both so completely. She said I was naive to think that a man like Jake would be satisfied with someone as predictable and boring as me when he could have someone who actually challenged him and excited him. Jake actually defended me at that point, saying I was not boring and that he genuinely cared about me. But Sophia cut him off and said that if he really cared about me, he would not have been sleeping with my best friend for months while planning our wedding. Then she said the thing that made me realize this was not just a moment of weakness or confusion, but a deliberate and cruel betrayal. Sophia said she had been planning this for a long time. She said that from the moment she met Jake, she had thought he was too good for me, and that she had been waiting for an opportunity to show him what he was missing. She said the wedding planning had been the perfect excuse to spend time with him and gradually seduce him away from me. She said it had been thrilling to help me plan my wedding while secretly working to steal my fiancé. She said every time we talked about flowers or dresses or honeymoon plans, she was thinking about how she would soon be the one in his life instead of me. The casual cruelty of her words, the complete lack of remorse or guilt, made me realize that the friendship I had treasured for years had been completely one-sided. Sophia had never truly cared about me. I had just been a convenient placeholder in her life until something better came along. I had heard enough. I stopped the recording and calmly told them that I needed to go back to the ceremony now. They both looked relieved, probably thinking I was going to go through with the wedding and deal with their betrayal later. But I had other plans. I walked back out to where our guests were waiting, stood at the front of the ceremony space, and asked for everyone's attention. I said I had something important to share before Jake, and I exchanged vows. I pulled out my phone, connected it to the sound system that we had set up for our ceremony music, and played the recording I had just made. The reaction was immediate and devastating. You could hear gasps from our families, murmurs of shock and outrage from our friends. Jake's face went completely white, and he looked like he might faint. Sophia tried to leave, but her path was blocked by guests who were staring at her in disbelief. My father stepped forward and asked if the recording was real, if Jake and Sophia had actually been having an affair throughout our engagement. I confirmed that everything on the recording had happened just minutes earlier in the bridal suite. Jake tried to approach me, saying we needed to talk privately, that he could explain everything. But I told him there was nothing to explain. I had heard him admit to having an affair with my best friend, planning to continue their relationship after our wedding, and lying to me for months about his feelings and his commitment to our marriage. I announced to our guests that obviously there would be no wedding ceremony, but that they were welcome to stay for the reception since all the food and music had already been paid for. I said I was sorry for the embarrassment and the wasted trip for those who had traveled from out of town, but that I was grateful they had witnessed the truth about the people I had thought I could trust with my heart. Sophia tried to approach me, crying and saying she was sorry, that she had never meant for things to go so far. But I told her that her apology was meaningless because she had planned this betrayal deliberately and had enjoyed deceiving me every step of the way. I handed my bouquet to my sister, hugged my parents, and walked out of my own wedding reception with my head held high. The aftermath was brutal, but also liberating. Jake and Sophia both faced serious consequences. His business partners asked him to step away from the company, and she was ostracized by our mutual friends and had to find a new job. Their relationship did not last. Within 3 months, they were no longer together, having destroyed their social and professional relationships for an affair that had never been about love. As for me, I spent several months healing from losing both my fiancé and best friend in a single day. But I realized that discovering their affair before marriage was probably the best thing that could have happened. I could have ended up trapped with someone who did not truly love me, or spent years not knowing my husband and best friend were betraying me. The humiliation of calling off my wedding was nothing compared to discovering their betrayal after building a life with someone who had been lying to me from the beginning. 6 months later, I can honestly say that I am grateful for that terrible day. It showed me that I am stronger than I realized, that I can trust my instincts, and that I deserve better than people who would betray me so casually. I am grateful that I chose to expose their affair publicly rather than handling it privately. Jake and Sophia had been counting on my loyalty and willingness to protect their reputations even after they destroyed my trust. By prioritizing my own dignity over their comfort, I made sure they faced real consequences. Today, I am rebuilding my life with a better understanding of what I want in relationships. I have learned to value authenticity over charm, loyalty over excitement, and genuine care over grand gestures. I am not bitter about what happened, though I was angry for a long time. Ultimately, Jake and Sophia did me a favor by showing me exactly who they were before I legally bound myself to someone who did not deserve my trust. If you are dealing with betrayal by people you thought you could trust, remember that you deserve better. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong, and do not be afraid to protect yourself even if it means uncomfortable confrontations. You are worth more than being someone's second choice or secret. Do not settle for people who would sacrifice your happiness for their selfish desires. Thanks for listening to my story. I hope it reminds someone else that they have the strength to choose their own dignity over other people's comfort, even in devastating circumstances.